like a diamond, light 'em up in the dark. We know who we are, we're a big bright spark.
Hi, welcome to Voices Talk Show. Today on this episode, we'll be discussing mental health in farming. And I wanted to talk about this because it's really important to talk about this particular part of mental health within our community because we are so close. We are a rural community and we have so many people who are experiencing this and nobody talks about it. Mental health in general for me, as you know by now, is really important. It's a very major component of pretty much everything we've discussed this season. For me, I know mental health from a personal perspective, being someone who suffers from anxiety and depression regularly. So I know the hardships that comes with that in general. When it comes to farming, however, I'm totally a city girl from Florida. So I have no idea I had no idea actually that this was such a big part of the conversation with mental health in our country. So I really wanted to give the space for that conversation. And so I want to go ahead and give my panel today a chance to introduce themselves.
My name is John Cole, and I'm a psychologist with the Lakeland Mental Health Center. I work in Glenwood, so a rural community with lots of farmers.
I'm Joel Dahlheimer from Alec Township. That's the east side of Alec. I farm, and I'm very involved in the community from the township perspective, sewer district, EDA, and just the community in general. Many grandchildren and kids.
My name is Robin Moore. I live close to Montevideo, and I have farmed for many years. I currently work for the Land Stewardship Project, working with farmers and working with community.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you willing to be open, vulnerable, and be part of this conversation. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. What has been your experience or thoughts on mental health in the farming community in general?
Well, farming goes back to the beginnings, and it's always a struggle. When it's a nice sunny day, things are nice. It doesn't matter if you have animals or just crop farming. Sunny days are good days, and we need rain at times, but we can't have overly rain. And then the money part of it, that comes and goes. You have good years and you have poor years. And then you have to blend that in and make that work. And sometimes it's a bad year, and the weather makes it worse. I mean, you struggle. It's a struggle many times throughout the years. But there's something to it that you're out there, you're yourself. You try to keep up on the technology to a point. And the community involvement, and I'm very involved in my community. I love my community. And I always want to make a difference, and that's what I tell my kids. So I'm juggling that with, into the farming part. If all I had to worry about was farming, it might be a little different, but then you have a tendency to, recluse yourself or whatever word I'm trying to use. And I'm out there with people.
Do you work off the farm as well?
No.
Full-time farm?
No, full-time farm, but I'm very involved in the community, so the township stuff gets me around. I talk to people.
Which is part of what keeps you healthy.
Yeah, right, and I get around. In fact, Bonnie at the township office sends me out to a lot of the people that could be a little hard to talk to because I somehow seem to get through to them. And they, sometimes they just, I need a cup of coffee. I just need to relax. And I said, yeah, probably.
It's good that you're willing to do that.
But so it's probably something in me that I didn't know I have, but, it's kind of fun. And I've been doing it for half my farming career. I've been involved that way. And you get more and more as you get older, you get more involved, so.
Does your wife work off farm?
My wife is a realtor in town, yeah. And we have a lot of grandkids, and it's We're busy. Well, my kids will tell you this. I'm never bored. I've never once been bored. They'll tell me that. Oh yeah, Dad, you've never been bored.
I don't know too many farmers who sit around for a real long period of time.
If you do, it probably isn't good, because you start thinking about things you shouldn't. But
What do you think, Robin? What do you think?
What do I think? So I come from a different perspective. I also struggle with depression and anxiety, but one of the ways that I always managed it was in being outside and working outside, and that was why I loved farming so much. What I quickly found, though, because I was doing it actually to support my own mental health. I was doing farming so I could be outside, so I could do tangible things. What I found is that the labor was highly undervalued. I wasn't married, and I didn't have family land. And so, those two things made it really hard to do anything. I was a hired hand for a long time, and I also had my own cut flower business, and I loved it, but because labor is so undervalued, because agricultural products are so undervalued, there's really no way, there's very few ways to build assets on your own to actually make a viable business. And the other thing that I found was being a woman is that a lot of the roles that were available for me were to be a support for a male farmer. Like anytime, all the women in my life loved being outside and loved doing it, but they had to take the off-farm job so their husband could farm. And that is a untold part of being a woman in farming, is that tends to be the structures available for you, and if you aren't part of those structures, you're constantly having to justify yourself. Yeah. And so that is a harder part that doesn't get lifted up. And the other part that Joel's story makes me just want to lift up is like, just as a statistic, 70% of total income from farm families comes from off-farm. Now, I don't know the statistics for how much of that is a wife working off farm, but it's big. It's really big, and I just want to advocate for we have this system that isn't serving people's needs in the lives they want to live. Yeah. So I see that as part of the problem.
Well, my lens through this is from two perspectives. I'm a psychologist. I have been for almost 35 years now. My father and grandfather on both sides were farmers. My family farms in northern North Dakota, right off the Canadian border. So I get to see this through the lens of my own family. But in particular now, I get to see it through the lens of my work as a psychologist. And what I'm aware of is that most of the time, a husband-wife farm team, in my work, most of the time, it's the wife that comes in to see me out of concern about her husband. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that the husband, especially on the dairy operations, the husbands are isolated. And it's a really huge problem. In the United States, we have this idea of rugged individualism. We do things on our own, and I think that's worse for farmers. And so I see the wife come in to talk with me about concern for their husband because he's depressed and he's not talking to anybody. And that's an exacerbation of a problem that exists with males in general. Mm-hmm. Males tend to talk about sports and hunting and fishing and maybe their vehicle. Yeah. And if you talk about something other than that, it's like you're speaking Arabic to them or something. Yeah. So they just don't talk with one another well. So you have the stigma that exists with mental health issues in general, and then you have that stigma is even worse among people who are isolated in rural communities. And I have an interesting observation with some men who, I have met some farmers who in the off-season, not dairy farmers, other farmers, when they have some time in the winter, when they have some free time, they'll travel. And I have a couple of farmers who have been to different places in the world, and they come back, and what they tell me is, I can't talk with anybody about what I'm observing because they haven't been there, they haven't done that, especially the dairy farmers. Then the other thing I think that's really important to understand, again, especially with dairy farmers, is that these farms have been in the same families for generations, and the profit margin has been so slim or non-existent that the infrastructure is breaking down. The barns are going to heck, the equipment's going to heck, and when a tractor breaks down, if the tractor can't be repaired, it's a big deal. because tractors are several $100,000. And when you're not making any money, you just can't do that. So you see the farm's infrastructure breaking down, the stress is just so high for people who can't, not only are they not making much money, but they don't have money to repair their equipment to keep on making money. So.
And I didn't even think about that. When you said generational, I realized like most of these farms are part of a giant cycle, like a giant business. So their great grandfather, their father before them,
Right.
and then you have it, and you're the one who's putting it in a place where it might be lost.
Exactly. My sister's son, my nephew, has 2 boys who are the 6th generation on the farm.
Yeah.
You see? Yeah.
I know you have important. I just want to talk quickly about the corporate part, because I think like this ties into what you're saying. So policies have been really carefully molded, and this is what LSP's policy work has been talking about. Really carefully molded to support themselves and to put small farms out of business. We've been really working hard to support large corporate farming and to defund and not support small farms. I mean, we have the Marin Bozek of the Minnesota Economist in 2018 saying that 80% of Minnesota dairies were doomed and should not be helped. That was his recommendation to the committee at the Senate. We have Sonny Perdue just recently saying that in America, which is also making it a thing about patriotism, which is lifted up by my coworkers. In America, the big get bigger and the small go out. Right. And so we have policies taking the rug under these small farms and basically saying you're too small to support. And then we also have this narrative that you're referencing where we're supposed to be able to survive. And so we're taking out any support and we're basically dooming them to failure, and then we're blaming the farmers for failing. And that is a toxic mix.
Well, in general, what you're saying is true about farming, but it's true across the board.
Yes, true about small businesses.
So, for example, the middle class is created through governmental policy. It's not supply and demand, it's policy. And so people have to take a look at policy kind of across the board, and especially with farming for our conversation today. It's policy. It's not free market, Adam Smith free market, it's policy.
Yeah, it's the narrative that tells us that that it's inevitable and can't be fixed. Right. But we actually do have the power and agency as individuals in a democracy with voice to really work. It's not inevitable. Like, it is not what has to be. And that is the message that LSP is working hard to get out. And me personally, like, we have agency to act against this, even if all the story tells us we don't.
See, in my situation, I'm at least 5th generation, probably 6th, but not on the farm. I'm the 2nd on our farm, and then my kids are 3rd, and of course I got grandkids. But you know, my dad was never into being the biggest farmer or the best. It was a way of life. It was what he wanted, and my mother was the housewife and helped him. When you talk about the women, if you don't have that, you ain't going anywhere. If you ain't got the wife standing behind the most successful farms, or the wives, because they're there. They don't get, a lot of them are getting more involved in driving equipment and stuff now, but the wife is important, and it's all about they're the glue to a good family farm. The wives are. I see it all the time. The guys are doing their thing, but the wives are important. But getting back to the generational thing, I was never out to be the biggest and the best. I just want to do a good job and have that time to take a little trip, because I'm very good at taking these 4-day trips and clearing your mind and having something to look forward to. I took my kids on a few hunting trips when they were younger, took them on a few camping, but it was always, I need to get my farm work done. Yep. And it's a 7-day deal. I try to get something done every day, and if I'm not there, then you come back and you start again. It's not easy. My wife's a realtor. She does a good job, but the farm is the main thing, right? And still, my farm, is the way our lives go is the way my farm goes.
So it's the
That's
center
how it is.
of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Well, obviously, with mental health, within that community, there's also the huge rate of suicide. And that's a major epidemic within the farming community right now. So how is that affecting the industry and our communities?
Well, I think with regard to suicide, of course, as a psychologist, I'm constantly monitoring people for a risk for suicide. And suicides occur after a long period of distress. People don't have a good life where everything is organized and going well and they're happy and encounter a crisis and kill themselves. They kill themselves after a long period of distress. They have a particularly bad week or day and they just can't do it, and they lose hope. So the couple of the real predictors of suicide are when you become interpersonally isolated, which we have in the farm community. When you become hopeless, those are the two things. The idea is it's not going to get better, and it doesn't work to talk to anybody. That's when you have real high suicide. So you have that in the farm community at a higher rate anyway. And we know that males kill themselves more than females. And what we also see in the farm community right now, again, especially the dairy farm community, as these farmers can't make ends meet and they fail, they don't have enough perspective to say, this is the result of circumstances. This is not me. So they're looking at great-granddad farmed, granddad farmed, dad farmed, and I'm going to lose the farm. Yeah.
That pressure, that pride, that pressure, I see that, I feel that all the time. The suicide part, I joke a lot, shouldn't, I do. You know, when this snowstorm, we didn't know where this last snowstorm was going to be.
Oh my God.
Trust me, probably if that happens, you'll find me in the backwoods. But I mean, but I can say that because it probably ain't gonna ever happen, because I know my kids. I wouldn't put them to that. Anyway, I just pick yourself up and you keep going. Because you don't want to give, my whole thing in life is you don't want to give anybody a reason or a crutch to feed off of that can make it worse. There's enough hard stuff in the country that you think, you know, I'm not going to be that one that buckles. You have to have a lot of faith. You have to have a lot of faith. You got to be able to lay your head down at night and this is going to be good. We're going to get there. We'll work this out. That's how you do it. You have to do it that way. And I count, you know, I got to be that strong one, seems like, for everybody. There's really no room for me, and I don't want to be that person. So I just figure out how to clear my mind, and you keep going forward. And everybody has that. It don't matter what you're doing, if you're head of the household, or if you're part of the community, or if you're that neighbor that people lean on. There's always that person, and you need, and you figure it out, and it can be done. Don't think it don't hurt. I write a lot on Facebook. I have many, many stories. They're all true. I bleed my heart out on them. And I think people, for the most part, understand. They know I'm honest. And I think that helps me, you know.
Well, what you're doing, that you're networking. You're talking, right? You're talking, and that's what keeps you together.
I mean, if you're working with your dad one day, and the next day he's gone, the next day after that you go on, and he was he was helping you every day. There's all that stuff going on. It could be a neighbor, you know, whatever, you know. You do not make an excuse. That's how I am. And you can clean yourself out from it, but you got to do it.
So you don't make
sit in the corner.
You don't make an excuse, and you're a really responsible person. You're also not isolated. Yeah. So one of the things that happens is when people get isolated, if you sit by yourself and ponder your struggles by yourself, your mind plays all kinds of tricks on you and convinces you it's hopeless.
That's what I'm trying to say,
right,
yeah.
Exactly.
And you can't do that. open that up and get that out of there.
I think one thing, just real quickly, is that, we talk about my granddad, my great-granddad, my dad were farmers, and we reference farming in terms of the male perspective. The males are the farmers, and I think we fail to recognize what the wives are experiencing in these farm families, because you said before, they're kind of keeping it together. They're the ones that seem to be monitoring how other people are doing. When we speak of farms, we talk about the Mark Johnson farm or the Don Johnson farm. We don't talk about the Susan and Don. It's to male perspective, and so I just think it's important to understand that the male, we identify the male as the one who's struggling with mental health, but the female is struggling in a whole different way with their mental health.
In ways that I imagine you don't get a lot of credit for in general, because that's what we do.
Especially if you're not married to somebody.
Yeah.
Then you're not even understood as being part of the farming community. I mean, people would say, the first question I would be asked in almost every meeting I went is like, oh, who are you married to?
Yeah.
And then nobody, and like, oh, are you the secretary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah,
That couldn't be, it did
It's
not
like you need the man to
Right.
validate
It
your
did not
position
compute
as a
that I was
farming
an
woman.
independent person involved in
But
this.
doesn't that kind of go back to a little conversation I had with you on the phone last Sunday about stereotypes? I mean, there's a stereotype of the old farmer. There's a stereotype of the old fisherman.
It's also a man's game right now. I mean, it has been, it's changing. There are more and more women farmers all the time, but it is primarily men. It's primarily men in the agencies that
Well, so you're talking straight up about sexism and patriarchy here, and my wife Rita, my wife.
We're trying to be subtle.
welcome to our world.
I love it when people are honest. Just be honest.
My wife Rita ran I don't need to do the context, but she was running a group for adolescents one time, a mental health group for adolescents, and it was a very effective group. And the CEO of the organization one time said, "How's your little group going?" You see, which is just representative of the thinking that goes on. So it's across the board, but in farming, I can only imagine that it's.
And now that I'm, working with agencies and working, helping host field days or workshops for farmers, one of the things that I really work on, especially with male presenters, is please don't say a guy could. Because when you say a guy could, then you follow every pronoun after that with a male pronoun.
Right.
A guy could go to his SWCD and talk to his officer, and he might give him an idea about where he can get a loan, and then he can, let's just talk about them. Let's just, let's remember that there are women in the room, and every time you do that, that's another curtain that they've got to walk through, and it gets old.
So do you want them just to switch pronouns? He, she?
Just say they. A farmer could go to their SWCD office and ask their officer, and maybe they could get a loan.
It's interesting because it feels like we've made that transition with policemen and firemen and, using fire people, and as a general term. But I've noticed in the conversations I've been having lately about farming, everybody refers to the male. Even all the research that I did, it was all heavily focused on the male perspective and what they do. And I imagine because I've heard even when a husband dies naturally or whatever, and all that responsibility now falls back on the woman, and she still has to take over the farm. I'm not saying that they can't have the farm by themselves to begin with. I'm saying like there's also those situations that are happening that causes even more depression, and I would imagine in women it's specifically, which would probably lead to a lot of where the suicide might be rising within women farmers as well.
That's the work that I do primarily, is working with non-operating landowners to promote conservation on their land. So I do work with a lot of women like that, which is fun. One of the things I just wanted to bring back to what you're saying is it takes faith to do this, and I wanted to connect that to what you were saying. It takes community to survive this. It takes, you called it networking, I always call it community. A couple of years ago we had a group of farmers and community members, because one of the things that Land Stewardship works on is is not just educating the farmers or supporting the farmers, but educating the whole community, because, you know, Paul Wellstone, we're all in the same boat. When everybody does well, everybody does
Right.
everybody does better, everybody does better. But like, so the community came together and worked on creating our own narrative about how we want to talk about farming. And some of the things that we came up with were everybody has a right to the relationship to the land, whether they're farmers or not, and that's part of being in a rural community. And another one was a really deliberate saying that a size of the farm does not determine its value.
Right.
And that we need to be transparent about the costs and the values that go with farming. You know, like, we really seriously undervalued the labor and the time and the stewardship and the care, and especially soil building, and how that's connected to everything else we say we care about. So we can come together as a community and hold those up and counter the narratives that bring people down.
Right, and this is like a year like this year. The thing about farming is, I mean, they were more diversified years ago, and I don't know if the economies or the America brought us to centralizing more on certain things, or if it's just age. But a year like this year, I'm not going out in the mud just to get my crop out. I have to make money on every single acre, every kernel. I need to make some money. I can't go out there and pull equipment apart. I care about my land. I'm not going to go across and tear my ground up. You use every day that it is given to you. If it's a nice day, use it for something. If it's a rainy day, use it for something. You get so many days in the fall, you got to use every one of those. And in the winter, you just make use of all your time. That's what I'm trying to get at. And I'm not going to wreck the ground. I'm not going to, you know, I care. There's a pride there. I'm not going to, I respect, I guess it is. I got a lot of respect for a lot of stuff, a lot of things, a lot of people, you know. But at the same time, I try to keep people loose, you know, and you got to just get through this stuff, you know. And
You know, overall, for our conversation today about mental health in the farm community, I think the biggest thing that we need to identify or talk about is that we need to talk about mental health. We need to make that for permission to do that. I was recently up in North Dakota. My family farms just off the Canadian border, right in the middle of the state. So it's very rural, very isolated. I was up there with my family. We went to the country club, which is no bigger than this room right here, and it's filled with, you know, I don't know, well, it's a little bigger, but there's 25 or 30 farmers in there, and they got to talking about how to get rid of flax straw. Apparently, flax straw is particularly difficult to get rid of.
It does not break down very quickly.
Right. So it was an hour and a half with arguing about the best way to get rid of flax straw. And I was part of it, and I just thought, well, apparently this is a very significant issue for people who raise flax. But let's talk about something else now, about how we're doing, you know?
Yep, I can relate to any of them
I mean,
conversations.
I imagine that obviously there's a huge stigma around the conversation of mental health within this community in particularly. So what do you say to the people who are suffering right now? Like, we've talked about mental health in general and farming, but what do you say to those people who are actually going through this?
The really, really hard conversation for me with the male farmer that comes in, the hardest conversation is when I get all the data about their life circumstances, and it really looks like their farm is going to fail. The biggest thing I have to say is your worth, your identity is that as a farmer. Your worth as a human being is not a farmer. You have to see your worth somewhere other than being a farmer. You know, I've been a psychologist for a long, long time, and my identity is not as a psychologist. My identity is a human being who tries to live a good life and be a good spouse and a good husband and those kinds of things. So we talk about reshaping your identity. If you think if this farm fails, you are no longer worth anything, that's an error in your thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is true.
And talk about that.
That was one of the biggest crises of my life, is when I realized I couldn't farm any longer, and that losing that identity almost broke me.
Right.
But I had community.
You know, I see this in young athletes all the time. Athletes who are really good athletes in 9th grade and 10th grade, and they get an injury, and they can't be an athlete in 11th and 12th grade, completely disintegrate in terms of their mental health. And farmers face the same thing when their farm fails. They have no sense of worth. And it's such a hard click because so frequently, because they're so isolated, and because they have this male handicap that we don't talk about, our inner life experience, they don't have the language to talk about this. They can't name it as, the problem is I'm losing my identity. They don't have the words for it. So giving them words is really important.
What about resources? What is like something someone can do immediately if they need to talk to someone?
We LSP just put up a website. The title is Feeling Farm Stress. Check out these resources. It's on our main page, and the address is landstewardshipproject.org/farm crisis. And so what we have on there are lots of resources for farmers in crisis. The ones I'm going to talk about right now are for the mental health specifically, but we also have a lot of tools for financial crisis and financial planning on that page. One of them is the Minnesota Farm Advocates. So that's funded through the state legislature, and that's something that they work hard to defund on a regular basis, and LSP works hard to get funding for. But they work with financial and mental crisis. The hotline is 1-800-967-2474. It's one-to-one assistance. There's also the Minnesota Farm and Rural Helpline. That is specifically for mental health issues, and it's free and confidential 24/7. That's 1-833-600-2670 extension 1. And then there are 2 Minnesota rural health mental specialists. No cost, no paperwork. Ted Matthews is 320-266-2390, or Monica McConkey, and her number is 218-280-7785. And those are all on our website.
Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate you guys being part of this conversation. It was very eye-opening for me as a person who is not part of this community. And I really hope that it helps somebody out there who is lonely or even thinking that they're the only ones, because that's usually the first thought. And I really appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anything else?
Yes, feel free.
As a farmer, I just, somebody that's having a problem, don't be afraid to go up and put your arm around them and say, hey, and I always said there's a path out there, and you gotta see that. You gotta be open enough. Clear your mind a little bit. I think that's why I like to take little 3-4 day trips, is to get away, because on a farm you don't get away. I mean, you're there, you live in it. You can't shut the door on the business and go home. It's there in front of you, and if it's raining, you're going, ugh. And if it's this, but we need to look out for each other and talk to each other. And talk, man, I talk. I mean, surprised I haven't,
that down, huh?
I do too.
And my kids go, or people around me, or if we're working out, I work out 3 times a week with a couple people in town. Joel, how many words a day do you say? I said, a lot. 20,000, 30?
That'd be an interesting setting on a Fitbit.
I need that. Yes. Invent that.
So anyway.
All right. Thank you so much again for being here. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Voices Talk Show. I really want to encourage you guys to keep this conversation going. On top of that, let us know how we're doing. Leave us feedback in the comment section below. Hit the notification bell so you'll always know when we upload a new episode. And of course, we want to keep doing this for you, and we want to keep bringing back more episodes in a new season. So we are definitely looking for sponsors as well as donations. So check out the Inclusion Network website, inclusionnetwork.org, and find out how you can donate, or call 320-762-4466. Thank you. See you next time.
We know how to take the lead and we aren't afraid. Shake up all the rules, pretend like they will never